The Chargers lost their first game of the season yesterday against the Steelers, and a lot of people are freaking out, not just because of the loss, because, this is the first loss of the Jim Harbaugh era. A lot of people are freaking out because of that, but it's because of how they lost. It's kind of similar to how we've seen them lose in previous years, but also the players that they lost during that game. So it's really like a trifecta of losing that we are all experiencing right now. And to make things even worse, we face the Chiefs next week. So let's just go over this game, what went wrong and what was good, because there was still some good from this game. I want to start out with this offense because Justin Herbert, he was really good, okay? And he only threw 2 passes that I thought weren't that great. One of them probably should have been intercepted by Patrick Queen over the middle. He got his hands right on that. It was a bad read, but he was under pressure. Did a nice job of stepping up in the pocket, though. He has still really good pocket presence, but Justin Herbert also threw some really good balls in this game, like one that was dropped by Simi Fehoko in the third quarter. That would have been a big gain. But Justin looked much better, even though his stats didn't really show that. Like, if you only look at his stats, actually, he only had 125 yards passing, 12 for 18 throwing the ball. So the stats might actually make you think that this was his worst game of the season and he's regressing. But that's really not the case. I actually thought he was much better this week than he was in those first 2 weeks. And he looked good really up until the point where he first got hit. I think it was that first sack maybe. And then he started looking worse because he was really hurt, probably because after that hit and then that second sack when he handed the ball off to J.K. Dobbins on that very next play, he was just limping and he could not even play through it. So he limped his way towards the sideline, and that was the last time that we saw him in that third quarter. Listen, man, I predicted in my video last week that Justin Herbert was going to have a big day and win this game in the fourth quarter. It was going to be close all the way through, and it was close all the way up until Justin Herbert left that game. And if he was healthy, if he stayed healthy and he stayed out there, I think that Justin Herbert probably would have been able to go back and win that game in the fourth quarter, because once Justin Herbert went out, that's really when the defense started to collapse. And I think that's because this team felt like deflated, because once Justin Herbert goes out, that's your starting quarterback. That is like your leader on this team, not just the offense, but this entire team. And I think that defense, they stopped playing with maximum effort, right? And they just wanted to get out of there. So Justin Herbert was only sacked twice in this game, but this offensive line, they gave up 5 sacks in total to the Steelers. And you might just look at that stat and you think that the offensive line was terrible in pass protection and throughout this entire game, but that's actually not really the case. I thought that they had a pretty good start to this game in pass protection, and it wasn't until Justin Herbert left that they really started to let up some of those pressures and sacks. I also thought some of those sacks that were let up against Taylor Heinicke, like one sack that TJ Watt had on Joe Alt, I thought Taylor Heinicke should have stepped up in the pocket to avoid that defender, but he didn't, and that happened a couple times actually. So the numbers are skewed a little bit to make the offensive line look worse than they actually played, because Taylor Heinicke's pocket presence, not really that great. But I will say the run blocking is where this offensive line struggled against that Steelers defensive front. That Steelers D-line and linebackers, they're pretty good, man, but this entire game, they could not get really anything going on the ground. There are a couple reasons for that. I think like J.K. Dobbins couldn't get anything going on the ground. He was 15 for 44 yards. He had that 13-yard run. That was his longest. So outside of that one, he was 14 rushes for 31 yards, which that's not Jim Harbaugh football, bro. You need to pound the rock better than that. And I thought that the Chargers in the first 2 weeks, like, they did a really great job of using Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins like to complement each other for this rushing offense. I thought that was a really good strategy that they had, and it really worked out late in games in those first 2 weeks. And it just seemed like they totally abandoned that game plan. And then they used J.K. Dobbins just as the main back, like as the go-to guy. It wasn't really like a running back by committee approach like we saw those first 2 weeks. And the way that I saw it was that Gus Edwards wasn't really getting a ton of yardage, yeah, but he was getting some nice chunk plays, like 3 yards, 4 yards here and there, and he was wearing down that defense because he's such a big running back and he is plowing through these defenders. And then J.K. Dobbins would come in, and his running style, like, it is so different than Gus Edwards. He's way more elusive, and he's so shifty. He's got great vision, and they can just, boom, explode through those holes that Gus Edwards would just kind of plow through. And that would create more success for J.K. Dobbins because he would have less carries, so he'd be, more fresh to get in the games. But also that defense, they're used to tackling Gus Edwards, right? So those two running styles, they're very different. Kind of tricks you a little bit. You know what I mean? Hopefully they go back to giving Gus Edwards the ball more because, I don't know for sure if that's the reason why that running game was so successful. But that's how I was looking at it. Like Gus Edwards was getting those valuable runs, like those 3-4 yard runs are pretty valuable, especially when you're basically running the ball the entire game. Like your offense is really predicated on running the ball. I mean, that's what I thought they wanted to do. I thought it was working really well, and for some reason, they just didn't allow that to even develop in this game. And the offense also lost Rashawn Slater to injury, and we're waiting to get an update on him, but he was in and out of the game since that first half. Jamaree Salyer went in for him initially, and then Trey Pipkins filled in at left tackle, and then Jamaree went towards the right guard spot. So there's quite a bit of movement once Rashawn Slater went out, but that's another reason that this offensive line wasn't as good as it was in those first 2 weeks. But, I'm just going to be honest with you. Rashawn Slater didn't really play the way that we expect of him to play, like an elite left tackle in this game, because probably that injury was bugging him. He was going in and out of the game until he was finally out in the second half. Obviously, he's got an injury that's bothering him, and so hopefully he can get healthy as well. Be back for the Chiefs, man. We got some big injuries with some of our big players. Joe Alt was injured too. I actually thought he played pretty well against TJ Watt. Some of those sacks and some of those pressures he let up, Taylor Heinicke should have stepped up in the pocket, like I said, but we're waiting to hear on Joe Alt and we're waiting to hear on Rashawn Slater, our two elite tackles, right? Now they're both injured and our quarterback is injured and we lost. See what I mean? It feels terrible. But you know what? Shout out to Lad McConkey and Quentin Johnston, though, because both of those guys, they look like solid wide receivers, man. And I think that they should throw the ball to Quentin Johnston more and try to get him more involved the same way that they were trying to get Darius Davis involved when they got close to the red zone on that one drive. At some point, though, once Justin Herbert gets fully healthy, right? Knock on wood, this offense is going to start to click. And I just hope that Justin Herbert can get healthy soon. Because, listen, his x-rays, they came back negative, but he does have a high ankle sprain. We're going to wait to see if Jim Harbaugh holds him out. We're in the dark right now. Now, this defense, I actually thought that they played pretty great, honestly, in general, all the way up until Justin Herbert left the game. Like I said earlier, they only allowed 7 points in the first half, 3 points in the third quarter, but then the fourth quarter is when it all just kind of blew up in their faces. They allowed 10 points, probably because they felt as though they didn't have a real shot anymore with Justin Herbert not playing. I will say, though, that Justin Fields, he looked really good, and he threw some balls over the middle of the field with really great accuracy and anticipation. So shout out to him. I want to give him his credit, but some of those completions over the middle of the field were way too easy in the second half. The Steelers, this is a reason why. The Steelers were throwing the ball in the flat in that first half. And then in the second half, the Chargers, they would commit underneath with their defenders like Derwin James, and then that would leave the middle of the field open because the safeties would be the guys that come down in the flats usually. The Steelers realized that, and that's why they changed their game plan in the second half, and they really got a lot of that yardage over the middle. Speaking of Derwin James, he was playing like a madman out there, which is both good and bad, right? He came down and he hit some guys really hard, stopped runs, stopped some short passes, but he also had 2 15-yard penalties, a face mask, and a helmet-to-helmet hit. In the second half, they would use that aggressiveness against him, which is part of the reason that middle of the field was so open. But Daiyan Henley, he continues to impress me. Khalil Mack, too, he's also really good. Both those guys are legit, and they have looked good every week now. So consistently, they are looking really good. Christian Fulton, also another one of those guys that looks great. He looked good both in coverage and in run defense, while also being a pretty solid tackler. So all those guys are consistently good. Asante Samuel Jr., though, he is up and down. He's good in coverage most of the time. He's good in coverage. And he's really aggressive, but that's the same thing as with Derwin James, right? Sometimes that aggressiveness, it is a detriment to his game, and he misses tackles. If he's late on a pass, he's going to whiff on the ball, and then he's also going to miss on that tackle and allow a huge game like we saw on one of those plays against the Steelers yesterday. Honestly, this was a good game. It was really close all the way up until the second half when the injuries started to really pile up for the Chargers. I didn't even mention Joey Bosa. He only played 2 snaps in this game. So he's another guy. That's 3 major injuries. 4 major injuries. Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, Justin Herbert, and Joey Bosa. Those are our elite guys. But the Chargers, they were in this game and for 3 quarters until the 4th quarter, man. And things really unraveled when Justin Herbert left. So I'm not too concerned with the team as much as I'm concerned with like the injuries. Credit to the Steelers, though. That defense and Justin Fields, like they deserve to win this one. But if Justin Herbert was healthy, I don't know how that game would have ended. I think 4th quarter comeback. Hey, I don't know, right? 4th quarter game-winning drive. That's what I predicted to happen.